Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. It appears as though things are falling apart. Stacy.
Well, certainly remember those supply shortages that we were first seeing at the early days of the lockdown. Well, we're seeing some significant shortages now, and on the high-tech end rather than on the basics, the food end, right? But before I get to that, I want to tell you that on the next episode of Keiser Report, we are going to talk to you about that Morgan Stanley report that everybody's talking about, the Morgan Stanley report about Bitcoin as a replacement for the US dollar and how it's succeeding in doing that.
Oh, that's great. I can hardly wait. I've got my flamethrowers ready to go.
Right. But because we are talking to Dan Collins, who's an expert on the China-US trade relationship, this is a perfect time to discuss what we're going to be discussing here, and that is the shortages in those crucial chip shortages, the semiconductors, right? U.S. to explore immediate actions to address chip shortage, says the Nikkei. And this was First Squawk tweeting about it. And they were talking about, well, you know, there's loads of production shutting down from automobiles and things like that because there's an actual shortage of semiconductors. I guess partly because of the supply shortages that are emerging due to COVID restrictions at many manufacturers. And on top of it, we have a lot of demand because if you think about it, TSMC is the biggest one of these, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. And they are almost a sole provider to all ASICs for the chips. So there's a lot of demand from the Bitcoin sector for these chips. There's a lot of demand from the gaming sector where all these kids locked down at home. Loads of people buying high-tech equipment while they're locked down around the world. So there's a lot of demand for semiconductor chips and the products that, from people in lockdown. But there's also a shortages due to COVID.
Right. There's a lot of demand for semiconductor chips. You know, that this is the basic building block of the electronic information cyber economy, gaming economy, attention-based economy is based on the chip. And the U.S., sadly, does not really have any chip capacity. They have allowed other countries in Asia to become the dominant players in the chip business. And so when this type of supply crisis hits, the U.S. is completely reliant on the kindness of foreign exporters. You know, we don't have our own way of manufacturing chips. And as you point out, I believe it's General Motors is actually halting production of automobiles because they don't have enough chips. So they've got thousands and thousands of cars, backed up waiting to be finished. And so this is what we've been saying now for a few years.
Well, you're going to talk more in the second half to Dan Collins about that. He actually used to work for General Motors in China, and so he knows a lot about auto manufacturing process. But in terms of the U.S., yes, Biden administration says it will address global chip shortage. I mean, the U.S. used to just only a decade or two ago provide 50% of the world's semiconductor chips. Now it's less than 10%, where companies like Intel, for example, they don't invest in R&D and chip development because they get hit in their stock price. Any American company, investors punish them if they actually manufacture anything, if they actually produce anything, if they actually invest in plants, if they actually invest in any sort of R&D. So what Intel has done over the past decade is, they're not the worst. They're not as bad as IBM, but they do a lot of share buybacks. And especially last year, they were growing their buybacks instead of investing. So here they are. Intel is one of the named companies that pleaded with the Biden administration to essentially get the taxpayer to build some plants here for them. And basically, you have to nationalize it, right? Because of our predatory financial system. Everything is financialized. So if you have any assets on the books, it's going to get strip mined by private equity groups and hedge funds who will attack you if you have any assets, if you have any sort of research and development. So I guess you have to have like the Marines defend your manufacturing base, essentially. That's why the government underwrites all mortgages, they underwrite all student loans, now they have to underwrite all the semiconductors. So basically, we're having to become more and more like China in order to compete with China.
Right. At some point, the U.S. economy went over the event horizon into a world of pure financialization.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about this for a few years, where these companies like Intel and IBM, IBM bought 160 billion of its own stock back. The total company is now worth 130 billion, right? So it's cannibalism against each other, and it's eating your corn seed, a corn stock, right? You should never
not your Bitcoin.
no, yeah. But you should never eat all your seed because you need to plant it for the next year. That's what manufacturing companies, they invest in R&D, they invest in capacity expansion, etc. But buying back your own stock is eating back your own seed corn, I believe is the right farming term for this. And so what happens is it's absolutely guaranteed that within 2 or 3 years, you're going to find yourself at the mercy of your competition. And this is, in a chip plant, it's not easy to go out there and build a chip plant. As Intel is begging the taxpayer, the taxpayer has been bled dry by the other aspects of the dysfunctional American economy. So they're not going to come to the rescue. And you're right, it's going to be completely nationalized. And the U.S. is going to a command and control, centrally planned, Politburo style economy.
Certainly because of the predatory nature of our financial system and how it's so much more profitable to plunder a company than to build a company. And we, of course, don't do any sort of 2, 3, 5, 10-year plans like economic plans or industrial plans. So yes, we are at a disadvantage when we're looking at Asia, when we're competing with them, and they dominate in the chip manufacturing business. Now, here's some of the letter that was written to Biden, who's now promising to help them out. But just bear in mind that TSMC, which is the biggest semiconductor chip manufacturer, I guess Samsung is also their closest competition in Korea. TSMC is building a massive plant themselves in Arizona. So they seem able to build something here in America, pay the dominant wages that are available here in America. They have no problem competing here. So this is the letter by CEOs of several companies, including Intel, Qualcomm, AMD, and other members of the Semiconductor Industry Association, wrote to the new president, stressing the importance of increasing domestic chip production. Quote, semiconductors enable the technologies needed to realize your Build Back Better goals, including smarter and safer transportation, greater broadband access, cleaner energy, and a more efficient energy grid, while also providing high-paying jobs for Americans and strengthening our advanced manufacturing base. We therefore urge you to include in your recovery and infrastructure plan substantial funding for incentives for semiconductor manufacturing in the form of grants and/or tax credits, and for basic and applied semiconductor research. Where Max and I grew up in America, this is what we used to do. This is what the country was built on, right? These giant manufacturers who hired Americans on good wages, spent a lot on research and development, was always ahead. Like, these are the technologies they list that if you want to dominate the next 100 years, you got to be ahead of those. Like, so why don't these companies do it themselves?
Well, what was Silicon Valley? It was Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It was Stanford University. It was the post-NASA man land on the moon phenomenon. And that was what Silicon Valley used to do. They used to do all the research. They used to come up with the ARPA.
DARPA, yeah.
Right. They had all the research, the technology, and we became a world-class technology leader through the financialization process, which is essentially gutting of these industries. The funny thing, when you're reading this, I couldn't help but think about, had an image in my mind of the central bank buying billions and billions of semiconductor chips because they will come out and say, we need to support the semiconductors, so we're going to buy all the chips. Of course, it's a ludicrous idea because the chips aren't useful unless they are put into devices that power the economy. But similarly, the Federal Reserve Bank is equally stupid in buying back all the bonds that they issue, because without those bonds and that money circulating in the economy, and we know that money velocity is dead, there's no point in buying back your own bonds. So it's as foolish. This is a great example, because here you have America's financialization gone so wacko out of the extremes that we are now at a point where we cannot manufacture the basic foundational components of the 21st century economy. We are literally taking ourselves out of the game by throwing the keys to the economy to private equity groups, Wall Street, hedge funds, financiers, and money printers. And now it's too late.
When we lived in the United Kingdom, one thing you notice is that most British people hate the very, very successful British person, right? And you're starting to see that here, because who goes around that? Who's the one American, he's several nationalities, in fact, that manages to build here, manages to just do, despite all these, like, instead of being going to the government nonstop, with a begging bowl after you bought back all your shares, and so you've destroyed your balance sheet. Elon Musk, right? He just goes and builds it. I'm sure, like, Elon, I know you're a fan of Keiser Report. I'm pretty sure, I can sense it. And I bet you if he watches this, he'll just start building semiconductors himself, like semiconductor chips. Like you don't need to go begging. You could just do it. Just build it. Just if TSMC is building in Arizona, then that's your competition. Go build there too.
Right. You mentioned Europe and in the UK. Their entire economy is built on permission. They all seek permission to do stuff. And that permission process is the bureaucracy that keeps their economies stagnant for hundreds of years. In the US, the goal is, or the mantra is, don't ask for permission, just do. And that's what gave us the American century. And Elon Musk embodies that. He also said recently, if you want stuff, you need to build stuff.
That's right. And and again, the other equivalent to this is when we were in the UK, anytime something goes disastrously wrong caused by the government, what do? They form a committee to look into this for several years, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's what Biden's doing. President Biden will sign an executive order in the coming weeks prompting a government-wide supply chain review for critical goods, including but not limited to the semiconductors that power consumer electronics. The review will help the Biden administration identify what are the appropriate and immediate actions to take, which includes improving the physical production of those items in the U.S.
I had the exact same reaction when I read that this is exactly what you see in the UK.
Yeah.
The UK is really good at producing one thing, and that's more bureaucrats. More civil servants. That's their primary GDP booster, are creating more bureaucrats. And in the US now, we're going down the same path. Every single problem is met with increased government, increased bureaucrats, increase the payroll, increase taxes to pay for all these non-performing assets and nincompoops. And the results are going to be Eurosclerosis, is what Britain found itself in, and now it looks like they're re-entering that. The U.S. equally will be completely paralyzed because they're cutting off the entrepreneurs from being entrepreneurial. All right, I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, Dan Collins, China expert, is going to break it all down. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to entrepreneur and businessman Dan Collins, who lives in southern Florida after 2 decades living in China, where he worked for GM and then as the publisher of the China Money Report. Dan, welcome back.
Hey, Max. Good to be back.
Now, as mentioned, you are in southern Florida, and it's absolutely booming as fintech and Bitcoiners flee the high-tax Manhattan for no-tax Florida. You're noticing the influx. What does it tell you about how to run a city, Dan Collins?
Well, South Florida, especially the city of Miami, the mayor Suarez is focused. He's created a huge campaign down here to bring tech companies into South Florida, particularly Miami. You have the finance sector coming down. You have the tech sector coming down. You have tax refugees out of New York and California coming in. We have largely survived most of the lockdowns. We have kind of done targeted lockdowns focused on especially the elderly. We're lucky with the weather here, so we have outdoor dining from day one starting last March. It's been a great place to go through this pandemic. And the amount of people coming down is just growing day by day. And I think Miami's going to be really one of the future tier 1 megacities that we're going to see develop.
So in the United States, you've got a healthy competition between states. You got Wyoming, which is opening itself up to the crypto Bitcoin economy and being very accommodative for Bitcoin. And now the mayor of Miami has become a Bitcoiner. He's paying civil servants in Bitcoin. But let's look at the country as a whole and how it's doing competing with its competition, in this case, China. And the China and the U.S., what do the shipping rates tell us about how this competition is doing, Dan?
In the world of atoms and not bits, we're failing miserably. So manufacturing, real world physical industries, shipping costs in the last several months have doubled. They're over, it used to be $3,000 to $4,000 for a 40-foot container. It's now northwards of $6,000 for a container. China's exporting so much to us. Everything's backlogged. There's a major chip shortage, which is going to last years. We are no longer able to compete globally in the marketplace with real physical goods. Our main exports being soybeans, agricultural goods. We used to export a lot of planes, then those started falling out of the sky. So now Boeing's having trouble selling planes. But basically we have shiploads and shiploads of goods coming in, and we have nothing leaving. This week there was news that they want to get the containers back so fast to China, they're all just going back empty. They're not even bothering to go and pick up the U.S. goods anymore because our exports are so low value added. You don't go pick up a $30,000 container of soybeans when you're waiting on a $300,000 container full of laptop computers or solar panels or anything else that China ships to us. So we're failing miserably in the real world of physical goods.
Well, it sounds like even the value of American exports has fallen below even the price of trash. Because I remember 10, 15 years ago, America used to ship its cardboard to China. And there was a big business in recycling, but of course China shut that down. And so now America has literally nothing to ship to China. They're just sending the empty ships back, which is really an amazing statistic. Now, tell us about the semiconductor chip shortage that's going on, because this is a classic example in so many layers and levels. Dan, go walk us through it.
Yeah, the United States, we invented the semiconductor. We used to be the major manufacturer of semiconductor with more than 60-70% of manufacturing. That's several decades ago. We're going to be down to less than 5% of global semiconductors manufactured in the United States within the next couple of years. Semiconductors is the new oil. It is the brains behind everything. The weapons industry, consumer electronics, vehicles now, cars have more than 1,500 chips in them. So this is the key part of a high-tech modern society economy, and we're now losing the edge in that. It's mostly Taiwan Semiconductor. Samsung, Intel shares, its share of the pie is shrinking, but we have a major chip shortage going on. Nobody is planned for this. We're going to be years with the shortages. The car makers are losing billions of dollars. It's estimated they'll lose $60 billion in vehicles that they could have made, which they actually don't have chips anymore. This is kind of the spearhead of the kind of global supply chain right now that's getting rocked globally, and it's going into everything. Prices are going up on everything, but chips is actually just shutting down industry after industry as they don't have capacity for them.
1,500 chips in a car. General Motors is shutting down production because they can't source chips. Meanwhile, correct me if I'm wrong, but a Taiwanese chip company is actually going to open up a chip fabrication plant in Arizona. So I don't get it. How come if China can build a plant in China in America, but America can't build a plant in America, Dan?
Intel's last large fabrication plant was built in China. So we had, under the Trump administration, he went and asked Taiwan Semiconductor to put a plant in Arizona. That's traditionally where Intel's manufacturing is based out of, outside of Phoenix. And Taiwan Semiconductor is putting in a massive $12 billion fabrication plant. Now, the only problem is in Arizona. The problem is it won't be ready until probably 2024. And in this area of chips, we're competing heavily now against China. China's throwing $1 trillion into manufacturing semiconductors. And, the whole supply chain, whether it's raw materials, testing equipment, the chip fabrication plant. So they plan to dominate this century through chips, and that's really where the area of competition is.
So the Biden administration has promised a commission to look into this. U.S. chip manufacturers are asking for some of the trillions in free money to build a plant. This is interesting because America seems to have completely lost its way here. So instead of just figuring out like we got to start building a plant and competing, they're going to do a bureaucratic move of having a commission, and then they're going to go out and they're going to beg taxpayers to foot the bill, right? I mean, have we become England?
Yeah, It's hard to say. I mean, the problem is, and we've been talking about this, Max, for years, is that there is no free market. So we're out there competing against countries that load up and subsidize their own chip fabrication plants. So it is kind of crazy. We do subsidize a lot of businesses here, but it's mostly sports stadiums. So if you're going to subsidize something, I would favor a chip fabrication plant. But to your point, I mean, yeah, just having bureaucratic meetings about it won't help. The real question is why we cannot make anything in the United States anymore, why our main export is scrap trash and soybeans. And once we start asking the right questions, we'll find the right answers. And that is basically Asia's Japan, China, South Korea. These are mercantilist economies. We've been deindustrialized. Our industry's crumbling. You know, we're printing $10 trillion a year. Tent cities are popping up everywhere. It's time we step back and not just have a meeting, but we start finding the root cause and taking action on this stuff.
Yeah, I'm also reminded or look at the infrastructure in the U.S. has been ignored for decades. And here we have a cold spell in the U.S. and the entire oil business in Texas is shut down. I mean, is that the comment on the infrastructure play, Dan?
Our infrastructure is an absolute disaster. For anyone who spent any time in Asia, you literally get depressed when you come back to the United States. I mean, my home state of Michigan will literally destroy your car driving on the roads. I mean, everything was built in the 20s, 30s, maybe 50s or 60s. We've done nothing for decades and decades and decades on infrastructure. And it's just baffling what's going on with the U.S. in terms of the infrastructure. The country's collapsing in slow motion. On
the semiconductor front, they're used in cars. You say that they are the new oil, the new, basically the building block of the 21st century. It's in all technology. It's in security. I take it that companies in G5, I guess it's called in China, right? For telephony applications, 5G. Give us a roundup. I love when you give us the update on the technological advances that are going on in China. Last time you mentioned 5G, and also they built an artificial sun.
Yeah. So Huawei came along. Talk about being asleep at the wheel. This is as America has been asleep at the wheel of China. Huawei went and became the global monster in 5G. Nobody can even compete. Samsung and Nokia have to buy from Huawei. They're small bit players. The U.S., we don't even have a company that can compete in 5G. Now we have our oligopoly telephony businesses out claiming we have 5G when we actually don't. It's like 30 seconds, in Manhattan a day, you can get 5G. And China's already working on 6G. The research institution's open. They're working on 6G. They sold something like already 200 million 5G cell phones in China. It's already launched out. 5G is 10x the speed of 4G. The real 5G is 10x the speed of 4G. So this is going to open up all types of new industries. So the first countries that get that going, they're going to have the businesses ready and the applications built to run in a 5G world. And we've just fallen way behind now.
For example, you have with 5G the possibilities for telesurgery, right? You can have a surgeon in one city or in one country perform an operation on a patient in another country using 5G telephony, and there's no latency. And of course, that is, you just think about that in terms of what the possibilities are in terms of simultaneous, synchronized logistics, medicine. But the U.S. is now lagging behind in a huge way. But I remember Joe Biden, when his comment when China was let into the World Trade Organization, he said, wait a minute, it's fine because they'll never compete with us. Come on, man. They'll never compete with the U.S. And now he's running the show in Washington, D.C. Would it be fair to say that they're still underestimating this competitive threat from China?
Absolutely. I mean, even a few months ago, he came out with the old "come on, man" speech. They're not competitor. I mean, have you been to China? I know he has because I know Hunter's been there. So everybody has underestimated China. You have to go to most of the people that comment in China have actually never been there, or they've been there on 1 week trip. You have to be there. I lived through this for 20 years. I literally saw people go from bicycles to Mercedes-Benzes. I mean, it's been the most incredible economic transformation the world has ever seen. China will pour more concrete in 2 years than been poured in the history of the United States. That's the type of numbers that are there. It's shocking what's going on.
Just quickly, I think it's important to review the debt situation because this is what's normally referred to as their Achilles heel. You have a different take on it, Dan?
China has definitely added debts. I mean, even 5 to 7 years ago, the Chinese housing boom that happened, most people were paying cash for homes. They were paying cash for cars. We've seen that transition in the last 5 to 7 years. People are actually taking out loans for homes, loans for cars. I think on balance sheet, China has 60% of GDP, but they're nowhere in terms of debt, but they're nowhere near the debt and the obligations that the U.S. has piled up. And the U.S. printed 10 trillion last year. We're going to have to print 10 trillion this year with no productive economy on how to pay this back. I mean, we going to pay it back through soybean exports or scrap trash?
Exactly, trash and soybeans. Sounds like a new fast food restaurant. Dan Collins will carry it over to second segment, but thanks for being on Keiser Report.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Dan Collins. Until next time, bye, y'all.